I'm Dave Bottomley. I'm with IR. I also want to introduce virtually here my two compatriots. That's Roger Benson, covers San Francisco and Southern California territory, and also John Hand, who's our Global Microsoft Alliance Director. So they're both helping me today at the booth and fielding all the questions here and hopefully giving away a television here for those who entered here. So I want to just spend a little bit of time on a handful of slides, and then I'll jump into a demo and give you an overview of what our product Prognosis is. I just want to tell you a little bit about IR. It used to be known as Integrated Research. Today it's IR. A few facts about this that a number of people don't know. We've been in business since 1988, so we've been around a while. We're globally and publicly listed on Australian stock market. We're profitable and have great momentum in the marketplace. Work with a great deal of enterprise customers, Fortune 500 customers. Something else to talk about in our history is we have history monitoring and managing payment systems, so a lot of financial transactions. We also do contact center and also unified communications. So just a few notes about Prognosis. The solution is we're not solely Skype for Business, but we also work very closely with Avaya and also Cisco. And one of the goals of Prognosis is to give you an end-to-end view of your audio streams, irrespective of endpoint. So you'll probably hear me beat down this mantra of take a look at server and infrastructure health. Let's talk about health of the endpoints, and let's talk about health of the connectivity. So Microsoft calls that server plant, endpoint, and last mile, but it's pretty much also known as server infrastructure, network, and endpoints. I want to put a little focus here on the center box where we talk about what we can do with our capabilities here. So obviously, first and forefront is the analytics and reporting. So part of what we're trying to do is reduce the time it takes to identify where an issue is. History tells us we spend a lot of time trying to find where our problems are, but remediation is usually fairly quick once we identify what that is. So in my experience as an operations person, what I'm trying to do is avoid putting you on that con call with 15 other people trying to decide what the next step is to get the next clue to chase root cause. So this is really what we're trying to do for you. Rapid problem resolution, as I mentioned. And one of the key things that we're doing for you is giving you the forensic evidence to take back to the appropriate group and say, here's the substantive proof that we're seeing an issue in a specific area. So this could be with whoever's managing the server infrastructure. It could be network teams, or it could be whoever's working with the end users. And probably some of you have experienced that Skype for Business entails a fair amount of user education. Some of the success on how they're going to experience Skype is going to be how well are they connected? Are they using the appropriate devices? Do they know how to interact with Skype for Business? And what's the best way? All right? So we also have proactive alerting. So we have thresholds predefined out of the box, and we have different types of alerts. Obviously, you set up an alert mechanism, and then we can customize those like many other vendors. So a few other things that are recent additions to our suite of tools is stress testing and functional testing. So for instance, if you have a remote site, we have the ability to make a PSTN call into that site. It's not just using the link APIs, but irrespective of whether it's a call center, we can basically drill down through the call tree, and we can also, like I said, do timed calls off to these remote sites to ensure that they're up and running, even when there might not be people in the office or making active calls on there. The other thing is we can do a stress test. So let's say you're bringing up a new raised floor in London, or maybe Singapore. There's going to be 10,000 people at that site. We can basically mimic the amount of traffic that's going to be active at that site, and then use Prognosis to find the weakest links in the chain, right? So the other thing we've recently integrated into the tool, and I hope to demonstrate this, is the ability to drill down into some of the networking gear and try to differentiate specifically where these points are a failure. So I have a really interesting demo to give you based on a hotel call that I made this morning. So I was one of many people on a conference call. So I have some forensics around that. I like to talk to this slide really quickly because as technical folks, you're asking me, how are you getting this data? Obviously, at the bottom of the slide, you can see the number of UC vendors we work with. So we have all these people in the mix, and where this is helpful, the first and second tier here is if you're going from a legacy UC environment or platform and coming into Skype for Business, this is where we can help monitor both sides of that transition and make sure that your customers have service and a good experience going from the legacy environment to the Skype for Business. I get excited about the third tier here. The blue blocks indicate the way that we pull the telemetry for Cisco systems. The green is Link or Skype for Business, and the red is how we pull data for Avaya. So in terms of the green here, you'll see SDN API, so that's the new SDN API provided by Microsoft, and this is how we get the in-flight telemetry. SQL is mentioned here because as soon as a call is completed, that's where we marry the data that we got from the in-flight call through the SDN API to what we find in the monitoring server in the QE-CDR database. The WMI is there because this gives us the opportunity to go pull performance data out of the WMI repository on servers and endpoints. So we have the ability to go into the soft phone and see the endpoint and actually see the processes running on the endpoint and see what kind of WMI or performance statistics are occurring in real time on that device if we're given clear path through the WMI channel. And then Active Directory, obviously, we need to know about the topology, but we do basically learn about your topology by either doing auto discovery, or reading the CMS, or basically absorbing a TBXML, which is your topology builder. So we can import those that way. So that's how we understand about your topology. So that's a little bit how we gather the data. The next tier up with the 3 gray servers in the blue, a few things to point out here. One server will manage up to 60,000 endpoints. So in most experiences, I end up instantiating a single server, and we do remote monitoring from that server. So this is something, we do not deploy probes to go gather this data. So we do remotely pull from these UC environments and also the network here. We can feed a manager of managers. So this is why we have a tiered, and this hopefully illustrates, if there's a need to maybe do regional type focus, we can scale out, scale up. And then at the top there, that's just some of the integration points. Obviously, I mentioned we already have the correlation and automation we do for you. But really, the trick here is we're doing the stitching of disparate data and pulling it into a data model so you can make sense and get visibility end to end. And I want to reiterate, by giving you some of that visibility, we're helping you identify where the core issue is, server, plant, endpoint, or network, and basically address this and go chase remediation in a much shorter fashion. So I'm going to go ahead and jump into a demo now. So this is the initial view, and we used to have a thick client. We still have a thick client, but it's primarily used for configuring the environment. But now, oops, I'm sorry. Someone should shout here. I left you behind. There we go. So this is a browser view, right? So it works with any of the modern browsers. Chrome, IE, Firefox, so on. We do have a thick client, but it's primarily used for managing the environment and altering configurations, doing customizations. But what you'll notice here at the top, we have this left-hand navigation pane. And this is a demo environment. Clearly within IR, we don't have all these components running. We're not that large of a shop. But this gives you a sense of some of the PBXs, survivable branches, SBCs we work with. We also can monitor call centers and some of the recording technologies, Verint, those kinds of vendors. And obviously, we're going to pull data from syslogs and servers. So we have the ability to minimize the focus here or reduce the focus. And I'm just going to go ahead and focus on Link. And I'm going to slide this navigation pane out of the way. So once again, you can get a high-level view of the health, once again, both in terms of the server pools. So this is, once again, that first block, or ring 0, if you're talking about it in terms of CQM. What's the health of the servers? So here at first glance, I can see I should already talk to my server admins about some of the utilization numbers. So this is a quick fix. This should be something that I could basically get this evidence, and you'll notice in the upper right-hand corner, we have the ability to export it to Excel, send it off in an email, or if we have to, report up to mid-management with this. And they also have this notion of adding to a mashup. And a mashup is simply a customized view of any of the subframes that we can find under displays. We might want to take things from different displays and add them to a mashup for a given group, let's say a NOC. So one thing to emphasize here, Prognosis has this notion of real-time monitoring and also historical. So we have our own databases, they're proprietary, so we're not going to ask you to extend your existing relational database licensing. So we give you that with the product, and we're going to be calling this telemetry, put it in our data model, and so that's how we're capturing, creating the historical view. So what you'll see here, there are some active calls and some completed calls. The other thing that I wanted to point out is we have a global search function up here, and I'm just going to go ahead and put a link users filter on. Let's say I'm looking for some activity by someone named Terry, and we're going to search across all those databases, but since I put the link users filter on, it's reduced it just to the link databases. So I found Terry, and I'm looking at some recent history for Terry. Waiting just a moment for it to come back. You'll notice the DVR control in the upper right-hand corner. This indicates we're looking at historical data, and we have the ability to move backwards and forwards in time with this control. The first button here takes it back to a given interval, and that's a predefined interval that you do collection. Or you could hit this button and it'll completely keep replaying history until you find the data that you want. So in this case, we have these two calls that Terry was on, and I'm going to drill into the details of this. What this is going to show us is a little bit about the call in terms of the timestamp, some of the codec that's on there, and allow us to drill into what we call voice quality details here. So this is the kind of detail that you're going to see here in terms of timestamp and the number of hops. So I jumped over to this call that I was on this morning. This is a given example of a real call. I was on a conference call, and you can see down here, and I'll try to increase my view a bit, you'll see I was having some pretty poor performance. And you'll see the durations here. I was on the call, off the call, on the call, off the call. So one thing I'm trying to understand is where is our issue? And what I want to look at here is when I drill into one good, healthy segment, it allows me to go ahead and get the network hops I was in. And what you should see here shortly is that I had really horrible experience from my endpoint to this first hop. Well, the question is, and I know this is a hop that we manage. So when I drill into that, this is the port that traffic traveled on, right here, 13, and there was no error rates. So because I was on the outside of the firewall, and we had clear communications up to the point where we own the network, this tells me it was on the outside of our network. So the other tip here is we can go back to the details of any one of these calls here. My UI is blinking a bit. And if I drill into one of these massive failures here, you'll see that I'll get a response code in the upper left. And when it comes back, and it will be very explicit about where, see it says expected failure up here? I can hit that, and if I scroll down, I'll have to maybe get smaller. What this tells, we had a network issue with the endpoint. So this tells me the reason I fell off and kept coming on and off is because I have a substandard network connection and it was beyond the perimeter of my network. So the other thing I wanted to show you here is, if I take a look at this conference in whole, this diagram will give you a graphic depiction of everyone who was on the call. So you can see everyone here. I was the only one who was joining and rejoining. So part of our issue as an ops person, right, and trying to determine, is this something systemic? How many people are impacted? So it was pretty clear in this case. There were a lot of people on the call, and they were from all over the globe, South America, Europe, and I was the only one affected. So now we know that, we can kind of hyper-tune or hyper-focus on where the issue is. And if I was to call up in some angry state, we can say with fairly good confidence, we know about your situation and why you had a substandard experience. So that's really what I wanted to show today. The only other thing I might want to mention here is we do have the ability in terms of Path Insight to take a look across some of our network gear. This is a holistic view. So we have just a handful of devices monitored. We have a pretty small shop once again. Here, if I go to this network, there's a whole number here of devices, network devices being monitored. And you can see at what OSI layers they are operating at. If we wanted to drill into some of the things that are redlined, we could go right to the port, and it will tell us pretty much what our issues are. So this is an example where basically the port's getting overrun. And once again, you may not be the folks who manage the network, but at least you can take this evidence and turn to the network team and say, we really need your help in investigating this and potentially working out the configuration. One other thing I wanted to point out here is we have some other things that show interfaces. We've already found the interfaces. You'll notice the devices and the ports we found half duplex. This might be something to talk to your network team about before it becomes a problem or before it contributes to a port call. And then we also have top 10, so we can tell you which devices and things like unknown protocols and half duplex, operationally down, administratively down, things of that nature. So once again, we're trying to give you a view of server plant, endpoint, and what's going on the network that affects the call end-to-end. All right? With that, I'm concluding, and